Hello, and welcome to Skills to Pay the Bills. I'm your host, Tia Young. Our guest today is a small business administration official. He serves as the Regional Manager, Office of International Trade, Export Solutions Group of the Mid-Atlantic region, which includes DC, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. Today, we are going to talk about going global. Our guest has almost 32 years of international trade finance, trade credit insurance, and international corporate credit risk management experience. He has served the Export-Import Bank of the United States and other private sector organizations, specializing in asset-based lending, corporate credit card risk management, and global capital market origination. His office is in the Northern Virginia Export Assistance Center in Arlington, Virginia. Please welcome Mr. Bill Houck to Skills to Pay the Bills. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Thank you, Tia. I'm good. And you?
Good. It's good to see you back. I think it's been a couple of years.
It has been, yes. Yes, it's good to be back.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's get started.
Okay.
Bill, some of our viewers are seasonal, international trader types. But there are others who are thinking about going into the export business. Is this a field that you can just jump into, that it's easy to get into? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's not. I mean, in our industry, we call it being export ready. And the basic foundation for being export ready is you have a business that is selling a good or service successfully in the United States already. You've been in business long enough to have established management, and management has to be totally dedicated to going global, to taking their goods or services global, because it does take quite a bit of effort to find markets, find new buyers, making sure that you can perform overseas, you can provide the same service for products or warranties. You can provide the same type of service if you're providing, some type of, professional service. So there's a lot that go into it. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it. They need to develop a business plan. So it's almost like starting the whole business over again, because you're dealing with with up to 100 different countries.
Wow. Now, so we're all on the same page. Can you give us an SBA definition between the difference of exporting and importing?
Well, obviously, exporting is you're taking a good and service and shipping it from the United States to a foreign customer. And importing, you are buying either a good or a service from outside the United States and bringing it into the United States.
Right. In your estimation, how can one determine whether or not they are ready or would be a good candidate for this type of business?
Going back to what I was saying before, do they have management buy-in? Do they have the financial resources to expend capital to go after opportunities overseas? Do they have the technical capability? Have they done the legal legal work to make sure that their contracts are viable overseas? So there's a lot that goes into it. A company can go to export.gov, or they can search Export Readiness Questionnaire, which I shared with you earlier. It's nine questions. If they score high, meaning 75% or greater, they're probably on their way to establishing or making an appointment with my office, with the U.S. Export Assistance Center, and talking with the U.S. Commercial Service about starting to find customers overseas.
Well, Bill, talking about that little quiz with those 9 questions, I took that quiz and I flunked it.
Well, you're not expert ready yet.
I know. I could not pass it. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of go over the questions a little bit, and maybe I don't know that we'll get to all 9, but I'm going to go over some of these questions. Yeah. Sure. It says, the first one says, does your company have a product or service that has been successfully sold in the domestic marketplace? So to me, it sounds like you already would have had to have a successful business operating.
Correct.
To go in, but I missed it. I didn't answer it right.
Yeah. Well, you've
So
got
what
a
would you
successful
say?
business, but yes, as I said, a company has to have a good or service that they're successfully selling here, because then they know they have the ability to provide the same type of service overseas. If they're starting brand new and they're going overseas, it's just that much more difficult to become profitable in the amount of time it needs to stay in business. So they really need to be established here and doing business here.
Okay. Question number 2. Does your company have, or is your company preparing an international marketing plan with defined goals and strategies? So when I looked at that, I said, okay, I have a business plan, but they're saying an international marketing plan.
Right.
So I'm thinking maybe, there's a difference between the two. Can you
Well,
go?
it's going back to kind of scratch. You're looking at multiple countries, multiple types of cultures, different types of ways of conducting business. So you need to develop a business and marketing plan to assure that you're not wasting your time marketing a good or a service to a country that actually needs your good or service, that there's an actual market for it. So you just can't. There are companies that export by accident. Any company that has a website is an international company. Many companies will get an inquiry and they'll export to Canada by accident. They'll get an inquiry and they'll ship to somebody in Canada. They don't even know that's an export because we're so close. But many companies will export by accident, so to speak. But to do it on a business-like basis, you've got to go back to the basics, a business plan, a marketing plan, again, just so you're not wasting your time.
Well, now, some people, especially just getting started, might not be able to put that kind of document together. Do you have recommendations on organizations or people that could help them develop that plan?
Sure. For the businesses that have personnel, that have the time and the expertise, SBA does have on our website at www.sba.gov/international. You'll find a business plan tool there that they can use.
Okay.
There is the large network of small business development centers throughout the country. Many of those development centers have an international person, and their job is to do exactly that. Take an established company, helping them go global by developing that business plan. So yes, there are resources. The U.S. Commercial Service at www.export.gov. They also have a business plan tool. But most companies getting started, most small businesses getting started, will use the small business development centers near them to help with their business plan. They can find those centers by going to SBA.gov and typing in their zip code, and they'll find the center near them to make an appointment.
Okay. Now, are these centers free, or do they cost a ton of money?
No, they're free.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and there's also the SCORE network. So those are retired business executives that donate their time for coaching. Typically, they're meeting with startups, pre-revenue organizations or companies. No, the SBDC, for the most part, is free. It depends. It's a 50-50 joint venture. So it's 50% from the state, usually university, and 50% funded by SBA. So a particular SBDC network in let's say Ohio, it may get to a certain point, and then there's fee for service at some point. But for the most part, we're talking about a free service.
Right, and I can do a shout out for SCORE because I've worked with them. I've worked with Walter Abbott, I don't know if you know him, and Dr. Paulson, and they were great. And I didn't have to pay a dime. It was very helpful. Let's see, this next question. Wow, does your company have sufficient production capacity that can be committed to the export market?
And that's a big. That's a big question a company needs to ask themselves. I would say on average, many companies either providing good or service, they're at least at 60 or 70% operating capacity. And they're always looking for, to fill that gap domestically. But once they become successful exporters, they can close that gap very, very quickly. So they need to understand how fast they can grow with the current capacity that they have, and what they need to do to add additional capacity, because you're not just serving the U.S. anymore. You're serving over 100 countries potentially.
Right.
And so your current capacity might be 1,000 widgets a day, but all of a sudden you've got 3 export markets that are requiring 5,000 widgets a day. So you need to understand what your capacity is.
Right.
And that's where SBA can come in, is help provide working capital to add that capacity.
Okay, that's good. Well, so far, when I took the quiz, I'm still batting a goose egg, a 0. I wasn't passing anything. Now, here's a big one. Let's see. Oh, is your company's management committed to developing export markets and willing and able to dedicate staff, time, and resources to the process?
And that goes back to what I was saying before. All 9 are very important, but without management buy-in, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So it has to be part of. If exporting is going to be part of your business model, a company's business model, management has to have complete buy-in, and dedicated staff has to be assigned to accomplish the export goals that they have in their marketing or their business plan.
Here's one. Does your company have adequate knowledge of export payment mechanisms, such as developing and negotiating letters of credit?
That is something that would come along when they start looking at potential new customers, and depending on their industry. So they need to understand the terms of sale depending on what industry they're in. If they're shipping a good, they need to understand the thing called Incoterms. These are the shipping terms, and they need to understand the terms of sale, meaning is it going to be letter of credit, meaning that a letter of credit is used to pay them, or is it going to be cash in advance, or will it be open account? I mean, in this venue, we probably don't want to get into the weeds on a lot of that, but yes, they need to understand how to negotiate the sale, just like they do here in the States, overseas, and it can be very industry specific.
But it's on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? We're going to take a short break, and we will return with our special guest, Bill Houck.
Minds can achieve anything. We make sure they get to college. Federal student aid provides more than $150 billion in grants, loans, and work-study funds to make college possible for anyone with the mind to get there. Because if given the chance, minds will do great things. Federal Student Aid, proud sponsor of the American Mind. Learn more about money for college at studentaid.gov.
Thank you for joining us today. Our special guest is Bill Houck, SBA Regional Manager, Office of International Trade, Export Solutions Group of the Mid-Atlantic region. Prior to the break, we were going over some of the questions that one could ask themselves or could take to determine whether or not they were ready for international trade business. And I just want to make it clear to everyone, I made a big fat 0 on my test. So I hope you will do much better than I did. Bill, what are some of the pitfalls that a person could just fall into that you have experienced with some of your clients?
The most frequent kind of horror stories would be a company is contacted because they have a website. They're contacted by an overseas entity, and the overseas entity kind of oversells their self on their ability to take the product or goods and service and bring it to their local market and pay. So what will happen is somebody will get very excited about a $50,000 sale to a company, let's say in Colombia, and they'll go ahead and they'll ship, and they don't get paid because they don't do their due diligence. So it's easy to get caught up. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a large new sale because of a very convincing stream of emails, exchange of emails, and then you ship and you don't get paid. So it's going back to those 9 questions. You really have to understand what you're doing and work with the U.S. Commercial Service at your local USIAC, the U.S. Export Assistance Center, or your Small Business Development Centers, or your state economic development offices to make sure you don't make that mistake. Right. So you need to be careful on who you're doing business with, and that's the reason why you need to be proactive instead of reactive to an overseas entity asking to buy your good or service.
So is that falling under like international security scams that people?
Well, it's just it's theft.
Yeah,
it's theft. I mean, it's not an internet or a payment fraud scheme. It's more of some company or person wants your good or service, they're just not going to pay for it, and they lie about who they are, etc. So wow. it is a form of fraud. But so that's the reason why I said companies need to be proactive in going after foreign markets instead of sitting back and then only fielding those things that sound good to them and potentially being defrauded.
Right. Now, let's say that I passed my quiz and I've had that talk with you and I'm on my way. Talk a little bit about how you interact with the new person that's now an international trader and the banks. I've not been very clear of the role, how you blend the 3 together.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the U.S. Export Assistance Center are three agencies. They started the U.S. Export Assistance Center started in 1992. There are 50 or so. Well, there's 100 about around the United States, but the U.S. Commercial Service is the lead agency, and what they do is they find opportunities for companies overseas. From that point that they start looking at selling to a potential company overseas, they should be working with SBA or the Export-Import Bank to understand what their working capital needs are. SBA, we provide loan guarantees. We don't provide any funding. We provide loan guarantees.
That's a good point.
So we work with banks to educate as many banks as possible in giving their customers access to export working capital. So that's part of my job, is educating the bank on how to use the programs and educating companies on the appropriate use of proceeds under those lines of credit. So these are commercial lines of credit, and they use SBA's guarantee as a credit enhancement to make the bank more comfortable in funding assets, meaning accounts receivable, inventory, and just general export-related marketing activity, et cetera, makes the bank comfortable in funding those activities. Most banks, they're only looking at domestic type of activity. Once they say international, they get very uncomfortable. So domestically, SBA provides a 75% guarantee to the bank to do business with small businesses, because small businesses are most banks will consider that higher risk than a mid-size or larger company. Once you add exporting to a small business, then the bank looks at that as considerably more risky. So we had 15%. So we provide a 90% guarantee to the bank to lend to small businesses that want to export. So my job is to work with the bank and the company so that the proper loan agreement is put in place, and that the company's getting all the benefits of that particular guarantee program.
So since you don't actually provide the funding, it's just a guarantee, what happens if somebody gets in trouble?
Well, I mean, we do require a personal guarantee.
Okay.
These days, I mean, banks are being heavily regulated. I mean, they're making sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted, and we are reviewing every loan, with the exception of the lenders that have full delegated authority. They can commit SBA on their own delegated authority, but lending requirements are still very strict, and so it's rare that things go bad. In the event something were to go bad, then SBA will pay whatever balance is left to the bank, and then we rely on the borrower, the guarantor, to make SBA whole again.
Okay.
So it doesn't happen very often, but it does.
What are the kinds of things that could go awry?
From the export standpoint, it's
Right.
probably a concentration of risk, meaning that when a company first gets started, they may only have 2 or 3 export customers. And one of those 3 may represent, let's say, 60% of the activity under the line of credit, under the loan. If something were to happen in that country, or if for some reason that buyer is unable to pay, and that concentration of risk causes the company to go into financial default under the loan because they can't pay back the advance that the bank gave them against whatever asset they were financing, either accounts receivable, inventory, or an advance for just regular marketing activity, then that could cause the company to go in default. That's one reason why we require, and again, we only have 30 minutes, but that's why we require credit insurance in many cases, so that if the buyer were not to pay, then the Export-Import Bank credit insurance, or a private sector credit insurance company, but for the most part under our small business programs, XM Bank is the credit insurer. That credit insurance will then kick in and pay for that receivable, which would cause that company not to go into default. So, but typically that's probably it. Or if a company grows too fast and they can't perform,
Too fast. What does that mean?
They take on more than they can chew, and they can't fulfill a particular order correctly. They have to scramble and make sure that they ship, and they ship the wrong thing, and they don't get paid. So so growing very fast can be an issue as well.
Actually, you mentioned something I was going to ask you about. We haven't talked about it earlier. Shipping, is that a critical piece to being able
Of
to?
course.
Well, talk a little bit about shipping.
If you're shipping a good, then shipping is critical. I mean, you're not going to get paid unless you properly
and on time.
Yeah, on time. So fortunately, there are numerous freight forwarders around the United States. A lot of calls I get from companies is, what do I do to get my product to Germany? The easiest answer for them is to search for a freight forwarder. And what the freight forwarder does is take care of all the paperwork from the time, to have the good picked up from the factory and shipped to the buyer in Germany. So they'll take care of all the paperwork. There are some potential needs for export licenses. Again, we don't have a lot of time, so we won't get into that. But in most cases, a company will not require an export license. But again, the freight forwarder will take care of all that for them. And a freight forwarder will also help document a letter of credit if a letter of credit is required.
Okay. Another item that has come to mind is about the immigrants that come here to America to live, and let's assume everything is legal. They got all the papers and everything they need here, and they want to go into the export business. Is there some basic things that they need to know, because we do things differently here than over in a lot of countries? What would you say to those people?
Just a little plug for, the U.S. Commercial Service has an initiative called Select USA. And that Select USA is an initiative to encourage U.S. companies to bring their manufacturing in the United States, and also to encourage foreign companies to enter the United States and bring their operations here to service the U.S. market and maybe other and maybe foreign markets. You'd be surprised how many immigrants come to the United States and do exactly that. They come here because of the business environment, very attractive business environment, so that they can get goods and services back to where they move from. So you may have a family business in South Korea coming here because of the business environment that they find attractive, and maybe sources of raw material, what have you, and they'll export right back to South Korea. So it's not uncommon for many immigrants, and SBA is currently looking at all the diaspora communities, because they do come here, establish a business, and many times they want to take the goods and services that are available here and send them back to their country.
Right, that's right. Bill, we have just a little over a minute. But I wanted you to just give some, I wanted you to have the last word. I wanted you to give some general advice to individuals who want to go into the international trade business, just in this 30 minutes.
30
to me,
seconds.
30, it sounds like this is not a, no, you have more than 30 seconds. But it sounds like this is not a business to play around with, that you really got to have your ducks in line. So, speak to that.
You have to take it just as if you were starting your business from scratch. You have to have that same mentality. And once you have established your business plan, your marketing plan, you've developed a relationship with the U.S. Commercial Service. The biggest thing is understand all the tools that are available so that your company is as competitive as possible. Because the U.S. Commercial Service will pre-qualify potential distributors, buyers, end users in a particular country. Before that U.S. company even starts negotiating, they need to understand all the tools available to them. And that could be the tools available by their state, meaning SBA does have our STEP program, our State Trade and Expansion Program. It's a grant program where companies can actually apply and get grant money to go on those sales calls. They need to understand those tools, and they need to understand how to use working capital and export credit insurance before they go. Okay. And that's the reason why the U.S. Export Assistance Center Network exists, is to provide all those tools before they even conduct their first sale.
Bill, thank you so much. And
pleasure.
We didn't get to half of the stuff that we needed to talk about, so I hope you'll come back.
Sure, of course. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Our time is up, and we hope that you have not only enjoyed this session, but learned more about what it takes to become successful in the international trade business. If you are interested in this business, go to the website link, which is flashing on your television screen right now, and take the quiz. I hope you do better than I did. Thank you for watching Skills to Pay the Bills. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.